So now, Jessica Downing Ford will be presenting to you Abigail Adams. The year is 1790. It is late, and you are Louisa Smith, the devoted niece of Abigail Adams. The place is Abigail's bedroom in the family estate known as Peace Field in Braintree, Massachusetts. Abigail and her husband, John, who is currently serving as the Vice President of the United States, returned in early spring to avoid the blistering heat of Philadelphia. It is now late August, and Abigail had to remain at home under your care, as she is too sick to travel back to the temporary capital with her husband. Listen, she's beginning to wake.
John? John? Oh, Louisa, come sit with me, dear. Your companionship makes palatable this separation from John, my dear husband. I could forego ever returning to Philadelphia and all my responsibilities as the Vice President's wife, if not for the absence of my dearest friend. I hate to complain. No one is without difficulties, rather in high or low life, and every person knows best where their own shoe pinches. This separation isn't as long, nor will the distance be as far as we've become accustomed in our 26 years of marriage. 27 this October. But I am quite finished with this business of being apart. I have spent many nights alone, some more frightening than others. Even before John was called to serve the Continental Congress in '74, he traveled the court circuit. He'd regularly be gone a fortnight as he argued cases from North and New Hampshire to as far south as Rhode Island. In the winter of '76, the fighting escalated in Boston, and I lost many nights' rest. In March of that same year, after the British lost the high ground at Dorchester, they evacuated the harbor, and the Continental Army began its migration to protect the capital. The siege was ended, and people, thousands of people, were again able to travel freely in and out of the city. And with them, traveled disease. Smallpox. The scourge, as they called it. It would attack the body with fever, headache, back pain, nausea. When the fever broke, sores would erupt in the soft tissue of the mouth, nose, and throat, and then spread to the rest of the body. The sores filled with pus till they ruptured, scabbing and falling off, leaving terrible scars on the survivors. But many didn't survive. I had lost 8 neighbors, a trusted servant, John's brother, and my dear mother in the dysentery outbreak just that prior fall. I was terribly worried about a smallpox outbreak. Congress was back in session in Philadelphia, and John in attendance, so whatever my fate, I would suffer it alone. I had only his letters to comfort me. My dearest friend, I cannot express the pleasure I have in learning that you sustain with such fortitude the shocks and terrors of the times. You are really, really brave. You are a heroine. Smallpox inoculations require cutting the arm of a healthy person and taking some infected tissue from one already carrying the pox and inserting it. It was considered radical by some because the one treated would indeed become ill, but their symptoms and the risk of death were greatly reduced. John had been inoculated the summer before we married, and though an ordeal, he fully recovered. I had wished at the time that my parents would have consented to let me join him and be treated, but they were afraid they'd lose me and rejected my proposal. In the spring of '76, the thought of doing nothing while this outbreak spread became intolerable. I wrote to John. I would take the children and we would go into my Uncle Isaac's in Boston, where we would all undergo inoculation and recover for the month of July. I waited so anxiously for the return post, for word from my dearest friend, my children's father. His opinion and care for our well-being was what I desired above all. Well, he consented, requiring only that we keep him appraised of our every change in condition. I made the arrangements. Dr. Bullfinch would administer the inoculation. He was an expert at the procedure. There would be no quarantine, only the mandate that a red flag be hung above the front door as the first sign of illness. It was agonizing watching my children, all under the age of 11, undergo such a harrowing experience. I worried incessantly. Had I made the right decision? For myself, I suffered very little physical discomfort. I missed only one meeting with the congregation. And of my children, John Quincy took ill first and suffered the least. Then my daughter Nabby. But my younger boy showed no sign of illness. So a second inoculation was given. And we waited. People were allowed to visit, worship, conduct business after being exposed, and Boston was literally brimming with the pox. Nearly every home displayed the red flag of warning by the 18th, when a spirited crowd gathered on King Street to hear the Proclamation for Independence being read for the first time. Because of John's participation in the writing with Congress, I had been privy to much of the content of the many drafts submitted to the Congress. But to hear it read, surrounded by the good people of Boston, it was invigorating. I remember standing in the middle of the road, looking west to the balcony of the State House. The air hanging heavy and humid with the sulfur smell of rotten eggs. Boisterous members of the crowd firing celebratory rounds from their muskets into the air. And all across the city, the bells in the steeples rang. The crowd cheered, "God save our American states!" It made it rather hard to hear the words being read. And although I knew that this final document fell short of my hopes for the female sex, and that vital content about equality was absent, I was moved, overcome, tears spilled from my eyes. Independence, a word too treasonous to think just a year before, and now public, out, for all to hear. On the short walk back to my uncle's, I was deeply distracted. What would be the time? What sort of outcome could there be to such a lofty pursuit? How would the women and the children fare during what would be an unavoidable war for our freedom? I recalled a letter I had written John months prior, asking that in the new code of laws, he remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than his ancestors. I implored that he not put so much unlimited power into the hands of the husbands, as all men would be tyrants if they could. I warned that if particular care and attention were not paid to the ladies, we would be determined to foment a rebellion. Well, I don't need to tell you what good that did. John called me saucy for writing those words. I've often lamented that patriotism in the female sex is the most disinterested of all virtues. Being excluded from honors and offices, we cannot attach ourselves to state or government for having held a place of eminence. Yet in all history, and every age, there exhibits instances of patriotism in the female sex. We suffer the shortages. We go without tea, sugar, pins. We manage the property, educate the children, cultivate the fields, step beyond the bounds of our sex for the good of family and country. We bear the children who fight for freedom and die. August came, and still my youngest boy showed not the slightest hint of illness. I began defying Dr. Bullfinch's strict orders on diet, feeding Charles and Thomas meat. I even offered wine, hoping to instigate a reaction to the treatment. Finally, Tommy, my youngest, took it. I was quite concerned for his health. He had nearly joined my mother in death during the dysentery outbreak. But in the months since, his strength was recovered and he tolerated the experience. A third inoculation was given to Charles, my Charles, and yet he would be my only child to acquire the pox in the natural way, exposure to one already infected. He suffered severely. He was delirious for days, and we feared for his young life. And that the fateful news would be transmitted by post. It was 400 miles to Philadelphia from Boston, a fortnight for letters to arrive. I do not know where Charles got the fortitude necessary for that recovery. But in my happiness and relief, I was keenly aware that John would suffer his fears for weeks to come. Of our first 20 years of marriage, we spent half apart. Were it not for his letters, I could not have sustained. My dearest friend, it always gives me such an agreeable sensation. It is a balm for my heart. That one simple expression is more valuable to me than any part of the letter. I have no doubt that the tenderest of affections, nor the sincerest regard of my absent friend. That expression can soothe my heart to rest amidst 1,000 anxieties. Louisa, has the post yet arrived? I won't sleep again tonight. Shall we visit? Do you have any questions for your auntie? Yes? Yes.
How did you and John meet?
Oh, well, John came to my house. My father was a minister, and so many people gathered at my home. And he came actually with a young man named Richard Cranch, who was courting my older sister Mary. And I can't say as I was very impressed the first time I met him. He was rather dull and a bit glum. But our love of knowledge and education just, there was no avoiding it. The longer we were friendly, the more my heart just melted for him as he appreciated the fact that I had so much knowledge. It was not necessarily common for women to be as well read as I was. Again, my father had quite a library because of his position in the community. And John always respected that I was well read, and I respected that he respected that. Anyone? Yes?
How would you characterize your experience to be the wife of the vice president?
Oh. Well, I can't say as I didn't like it. I very much enjoyed John's political career when I was able to be a part of it. When he spent 5 years in Europe and I was home, and often without letters, I tell you, it was very hard. I felt completely cut off. But when we were in Philadelphia during his vice presidency, I struggled. I'm a simple farm girl, really, and there's lots of hosting and dinners and such, and lots of political things that, although I enjoy a good conversation, it's a lot of responsibility. So I enjoyed it, but yet to be home in Peacefield, that's where my heart is. Yes.
What kind of hopes do you have for your son, John Quincy?
Oh, John Quincy. Well, he is doing quite well for himself. When John was called overseas originally, I insisted that he take John Quincy, even though he was only 11 years old. It was a terrible choice as a mother. Certainly I miss my child, but an opportunity to get outside of New England, I knew it would do much for his future and what he would be, the type of roles that he could play. So he went to France. From there, he went over to Amsterdam, and he is currently in Russia, which is terribly far away from me. But I am very happy about the opportunity he has. A very bright future, I'm certain. He's a lot like his father. He's a bit stubborn, but he also has a very good heart and an excellent mind.
Why did you select Abigail? She's still
I know as a mother, you love
Yes.
your children dearly, but which one is the one that will push your buttons?
Oh, well, Nabby, my daughter Abigail, Nabby, I think she and I have had the most volatile of parent-child relationships. I love her dearly, but she's also female, and she has her own ideas. We're very different. She's quite private and quiet, and I am not. And that has been an issue in our relationship.
You like to know what she's up to, and you just like, no.
I have been known to get involved in business not directly related to me, but I do it out of love, and I do it because, young girls don't always know what is in their best interest, and it's a good idea to leave it to those of us with a little more experience.
Very good.
Yes?
Have you yourself ever got
Well, I did, indeed, but I only got it as a result of the inoculation. And it really did not put me down much at all. About one day, I was in, and that was it. It was very mild. I suffered very little, which was a good thing, because then I could tend to my children. I wondered if indeed it had worked because it was so mild, but I never did encounter an issue with the pox ever again. Yes?
Did you have many women friends among the politicians or among your neighborhood who agreed with you, with whom you could share your ideas about equality?
I did have many female friends, because with John's appointments, we were often in well-traveled circles, with women that had lots of education. Letter writing. Well, my dear sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, they were my dearest of dears. But then there were also, goodness, I'm drawing a blank on her name. She is magnificent. She is a playwright. And, I've completely omitted her name and will need to apologize to her profusely. But there were many women that I had the opportunity to meet. We love to exchange ideas because, like I said, not everybody thought women should be involved in politics or be educated. So when we found each other, we took it upon ourselves to help broaden the horizons. So we shared the books that we were reading, lectures that we had heard, people that we had been privy to see at the congregation, and etc. Yes. Okay. Jessica Downing Ford, researcher of Abigail Adams. Do you have any questions for me as the researcher?
Why did you select Abigail?
Okay, so I am a Braintree native, and so growing up, my first job was literally 3 blocks away from the house that she and John lived in when they were first married. Now, as a teenager, I could care less. So it really wasn't until my son had gone through 5th grade and we went back to visit family, and suddenly he had an eye for the fact that there was all this history where I grew up. And through his interest, I sort of revisited. I went to the Adams National Park, which is set up at Peacefield. It's a beautiful place, highly recommended if you can ever go. And on the 4th of July, they do a reenactment of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Then they also do a play, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. And it's a 3-person play, and the 3rd person is Abigail Adams. And in that performance, I realized that I had a new hero. She was so ahead of her time, unbelievably strong, resourceful, smart. I could just go on and on. It has been an absolute love affair with her. And the opportunity to research her for this was just beautiful. I want to thank the museum for paying attention to us adults. It really was such a great opportunity to be able to explore this passion, and grateful to be a part of the museum. Thank you.
Well done.